Good afternoon, and welcome to another live, unscripted edition of Live at the Waterhole, here with Wild Earth TV and Africa. My name is Liam Burrow, and I am the naturalist that's going to be chatting you through a couple of waterside scenes in a few varied African locations this afternoon. What a pleasure. Anyway, before we get too carried away with what looks like quite a wonderful scene here at Tower Lodge in Madikwe, I'd like to remind you that we do try and keep these shows as interactive as possible. Obviously, the human factor is important, so please keep your questions, comments, thoughts, etc. coming to us throughout the show. Director Chulu and myself are standing by waiting to hear from you. But yeah, let's kick this Sunday off with a bit of a bang. A beautiful group of plains zebra, who by the looks of it are finishing up here at the waterhole at Tau in South Africa's Madikwe Game Reserve. Yeah, quite warm conditions by the sounds or by the looks of things. So many herbivores, especially in this hottest period of the day, will make the journey down to the water's edge to quench their thirst. Hello Mercedes, nice to have you on board. Yeah, stay tuned. It promises to be quite an exciting afternoon live at the waterhole. But let's see what happens. As we know, there is a bit of an unpredictable nature to this kind of content, but that, after all, is what makes it so exciting. Hello, Joan Mello. Happy Sunday to you as well. And yeah, nice to have you on board also. Brilliant. Good afternoon, Diane, in the UK as well. I hope you're having a nice Sunday afternoon. Hope the weather is playing ball as well for you. And fingers crossed for some crocodilians. Yeah, we missed them yesterday, even though we spent quite a bit of time here at the waterhole at Tau. I wonder where they ended up. They were probably right there somewhere. We were just so preoccupied looking at elephants and tortoises and birds and all sorts of other exciting things. We didn't really spend too much time scanning for them, I guess. Goodness me, mountains of zebra though. Loads and loads. A couple of spur-winged geese. Yeah, these crocs can be a bit tricky to spot if they're not clearly moving around in the water or sat up on the bank sunning themselves. And after all, I guess that's the point. They have evolved over a number of hundreds of millions of years to be very, very difficult to see. And that's obviously very beneficial when it comes to hunting. But boom, right in the middle of the screen, there's one. I think one on the left as well. Yeah, certainly not the clearest view of a crocodile, but no doubts as to what that is. So that is about a 3 meter, maybe a 9 or 10 foot Nile crocodile. Certainly not the biggest individual. They regularly get in excess of 15, 16 foot in Africa, weighing around a metric ton. These guys are not there yet, but they've probably got time. And indeed, there's another one, hidden in the long grass. I think while it is looking quite sunny, that might actually even be two, I'm not sure. While it is quite sunny here in Madikwe this afternoon, it may be quite cool. And I think lower temperatures are probably reducing the activity we're seeing from these crops. Anyway, speaking of such things, I think it's time to check out what's in store for our various locations in terms of the weather forecast. So certainly about 25 degrees Celsius, which is high 70s Fahrenheit for Tau, so not the hottest of days, certainly by our standards, and that explains why we're not seeing super amounts of activity from these crocodiles. It's not the hottest period of the day. We see the highest temperatures closer to 2 o'clock, which is perhaps a bit counterintuitive. You would think when the sun is highest in the sky, it is the hottest. But yeah, closer to 2, it gets a bit warmer, and we may see these crocodiles beginning a bit of fishing or something like that. We'll certainly keep an eye out. Thanks, Diane. Yeah, lucky we found them today. But yeah, this could easily explain why we didn't see them yesterday. They're pretty tricky to spot them in this long grass. It's actually a pretty excellent hiding place for them. Always good to do a little bit of a scan around to not get too fixated on any one thing. You never know what may be emerging in the background out of sight. Absolutely, ants. So at least 2 crocodiles there. We know that there are a minimum of 3. I've certainly seen 3 sort of all lounging around together. So yeah, I reckon that is the extent of the population of crocs in this particular waterhole at Old Tau. That's not to say that wouldn't possibly change. Crocodiles are not restricted to one kind of waterway, and they have pretty remarkable abilities to walk over land. I've certainly heard reports of crocodiles that have telemetry equipment fitted to them, radio tracking kit, traveling up to 100 kilometers overland in search of a new place to live when one water source dries out. Casper says, happy Sunday from a very rainy Milwaukee in the United States. Hello Liam and Wild Earth TV. Thank you for these lovely waterhole safaris you bring to our homes each day. Thank you, Casper. That's a very, very nice compliment there. Always a pleasure. Yeah, it's pretty incredible to think that this program is entering people's homes and hopefully enriching lives to some degree all over the world right now. I've heard Wild Earth called the largest safari vehicle in the world, which is a pretty special thing. I'm used to carrying sort of a maximum of 6 or 7 people on a Land Rover and exploring out in the bush. So having possibly thousands of people along for the ride, if not more, is a pretty special thing. Yeah, I think having a little bit more nature in our lives increases the quality of life for us all. Ant says, I can't imagine being a crocodile and going for a long walk looking for a new waterhole. Yeah, ants, it's certainly a little bit difficult to imagine, especially when you see them on land with their big bellies, that terribly cumbersome looking tail, and of course those very short, fairly stumpy legs. But slow and steady wins the race, and they have remarkable abilities to travel over land. As I say, though, a crocodile is a very dominant, very powerful thing when it is in its element in the water. But when that crocodile is on land, far from the protection of a water source, it's a pretty vulnerable thing. And certainly they can be targeted by prides of lions. We do see that occasionally in the dry season. And lions will make a meal of even a big crocodile. Yeah, I worked with a tracker in the Sabi Sands that was off the vehicle. I was sat with the group of guests following up on, I think it was lion tracks at the time. And we sort of did a loop around the block. He kind of crossed through in the hopes of bumping into whatever we were looking for. And he dropped down into a big dry riverbed, something quite characteristic of the Sabi Sands area in the Greater Kruger. And as he came round a kind of a blind corner, he was met with the most earth-shattering roar. So he said his heart sort of dropped through his stomach. I think he was expecting to have bumped into the lions or the leopard that we were looking for. And he was faced with something like a 4 or a 5 meter Nile crocodile, obviously out on one of these missions to try and find a new place to live. Anyway, it growled, it hissed, snapped. He certainly backed off, and he was left with a pretty cool story. Nikki says, definitely, nature reminds us of how beautiful the circle of life is and how fragile. I couldn't agree more, Nikki. Certainly a very fragile system, and without a doubt not free from human influence in many of its far corners. So we've got to do our best to preserve and conserve these incredible oases of nature. Mai Chan says, is there anything left to drink? Mai Chan, there certainly is. So this kind of water level here at Tau will be fairly consistent throughout the year, and it is artificially pumped after all. Yeah, so back behind the camera, kind of out of view, there is a safari lodge here, a tourism operation. And in order to keep the wildlife concentrated nicely around the lodge, throughout the year, through the good times and the bad, as many lodges do, they provide water in this waterhole. Hello, Canine Girl. Happy Sunday to you too. And fingers crossed for some lovely sightings. Stay tuned. Let's see what happens. Loads of zebra here. Zebra do tend to be quite open savannas, so they do like these open areas. Doesn't look like a whole lot of food available though. But yeah, certainly a couple of groups of those nice plain zebra in the background. The large bird perched on the rock is a spur-winged goose, an enormous water bird. Diane asks, do they mostly move at night? I'm referring to those crocodiles, and certainly, Diane, I think under the cover of darkness, it's probably the safest time for a crocodile to move. It's also then at lower risk of overheating from prolonged exposure to the sun, which is a bit of a crisis for a crocodile stuck on land during the day. And after all, they are incredible survivors of very harsh conditions. So instinctively, if the area is gripped in a really severe drought, and that crocodile knows that no rain has fallen, it's not going to be worth making a 100-kilometer journey. There's no point going to look for other places, because that croc will understand that there is no better place to be, and it'll simply tunnel into the soft earth around the water's edge here somewhere, perhaps going 5 or more meters down, 15, 20 foot, something like that, curls itself up in a nice cool spot, reduces its heart rate, slows its breathing, and basically enters something of a torpid state. And that's a state in which that crocodile can survive for as much as 2 years. It's certainly been recorded. They are ultimate survivors. And then, as soon as that crocodile smells petrichor, the smell of rain hitting dry earth, when the rains do finally return again, it comes back as well. It emerges and carries on. Now, interesting, take a look at that folded wing on the spur-winged goose. No question at all as to why it's called a spur-winged goose. It's got that very pronounced bony spur. A bit of a projection off of one of those main bones in the leading edge of that wing. Something that it shares in terms of characteristics with a number of the lapwings as well. Now, not the blacksmith lapwings that it's sharing the frame with, but certainly the wattled lapwings, among others, have got those spurs. I'm not exactly sure as to the function of them, but possibly to do with fighting amongst males, and arguably even the defense of one's nest when it comes to the females. Geese, after all, can be pretty aggressive things. But this is a big bird. Something like 6 or 7 kilos, easily the size of a vulture, something like a frozen turkey. Rafiki21 has asked a very good question. How do they communicate? So Rafiki, communication in birds is achieved in a number of ways. Obviously, birds are pretty famous for song, for being able to vocalize. So a lot of information is transmitted at a distance audibly. But when birds encounter each other up close, a lot of it is achieved through body language and posturing as well. If you observe ducks in a park, there's a lot of head bobbing and wing flapping and all sorts of things going on. Not always the easiest to interpret, but of course lots of information about kind of the availability of mates and a certain individual's position in the hierarchy can be conveyed quite easily when everybody understands those subtleties. And this guy, busy as so many birds do, with a bit of preening. So bird feathers don't last forever. A bird will probably molt once a year, and by molt I mean it sheds its feathers, not quite in the same way that a snake would shed its skin. Thankfully it doesn't lose all the feathers at the same time. That would be pretty devastating and probably quite fatal. But it will kind of shed them in stages and grow a new set of feathers for the oncoming breeding season, probably next summer. but the activity of keeping those feathers clean, conditioned, and sufficiently oiled is a daily activity. So Nikki has asked, what is the wingspan of that goose? Nikki, they reckon somewhere between 75 centimeters and about a meter. So it is a really big bird. Apologies there, I think we may have had a momentary sort of breakup of the picture. Obviously this program is being streamed from a couple of very remote corners, highly reliant on a good internet connection, and such is not always possible out in the bush. So yeah, stay with us, and apologies. But yeah, these geese certainly are big birds. I spent a bit of time in 2022 flying a little bush plane in a very remote corner of Mozambique, the country east of South Africa, for conservation purposes. And one of my duties was a daily patrol of the lakeshore along the Massingier Dam, an immense dam, which is a prime breeding site for huge flocks of these spurwing geese. It was always a bit stressful for me dropping through the Olifants Gorge, having enormous flocks of these birds take off out of the reeds. Obviously having one fly into an airplane engine is not optimal, to say the very least. And Nikki, I certainly hope you get to visit Madikwe at some stage. I personally haven't been up here, but I've heard it's world class, very nice area. Certainly lots to see. And our grey heron strutting across as well. I'm sure that is the same grey heron we observed doing a bit of fishing yesterday. Thankfully there seems to be an ample fish population in the waterhole here at Tau, hence a couple of very fat looking crocodiles, and certainly that's what's encouraging all of this bird life. Now, life in an ephemeral pan, in a very seasonal pan, for many of Africa's fish species is a bit precarious. Obviously, if the water is not artificially provided, there's the very real risk that these water points can dry up completely. And obviously, in the absence of water, for most fish, that is a bit of a death sentence. Thankfully, though, there are a couple of species, like crocodile, that can either burrow down into the earth, something like a lungfish can do that, wait for the rains to return, and our catfish, like the crocodile again, can even make journeys overland, walking on their fins and breathing air for a limited amount of time. Thankfully, though, even if a waterhole does dry up completely in the midst of something like a year-long drought, when that water does arrive again with the onset of the summer rains, Very often a fish population can be re-established quite rapidly, pretty magically, with the arrival of birds from far off places. It's believed that birds wading through long grass in water where fish are spawning inadvertently trap fish eggs in their feathers and on their feet. They then take off in search of greener pastures, land in another pond a number of 100 kilometers away, and deposit those fish eggs, which hatch, and the population begins again. Isn't that outrageous? There's zebra in the background nodding in agreement. Alrighty, well, in the interest of keeping things moving, let's head to one of my favorite Live at the Waterhole destinations at Old Donyo Lodge in southern Kenya. So a stark contrast to fairly dry looking scenes at Madikwe. We are, of course, now at Old Donyo Lodge in southern Kenya, where the rains have arrived and the birds are out and about in all of their breeding splendor. And that slightly yellowish-tailed bird is a straw-tailed wider, the guy with those long-tailed plumes. And we've also, I think, got a superb starling in the middle there. And those slightly browner individuals off on the right are females of that straw-tailed wider. Diane in the UK says, nature is amazing. Isn't it just? Oh, I say it so regularly, I mean, a bit like a broken record, I guess, but again, it's just a testament to the interconnected nature of the natural world. All of those little fibers sort of stitched together with multiple connections, and it ensures the longevity of the entire system. But when the human race gets involved and we face extinctions of certain species, imagine pulling single threads out of a sort of a big tapestry. One or two threads might not make too much of a difference, but keep pulling out those threads and you weaken the entire fabric. Now one day it all just splits, falls apart, and it can't be repaired. And all the more reason to support conservation in the natural world. Sure, loads of females now. Mind you, I think these might actually be cutthroat finches. I'm certainly seeing some red patches on their throats there, so possibly not all females for that male thin-tailed wider, straw-tailed wider rather. Certainly lots of birds around, and we would expect that at this time of the year in East Africa after such prolific rainfall. Much of the grass is pushing up inflorescence, flowers, and starting to produce grass seed, which is predominantly what many of these birds are feeding on. Ray is asking, how do you know which one is male and which one is female? Ray, if we're talking about these cutthroat finches, the cutthroat is the clearest indicator. So the male has the little red, almost bloody looking patch under his chin. The female does not. And in the case of the straw-tailed wider, that guy with the lovely long tail feathers, that's now exited. Oh, there he is, back again. The male has the long tail, the female does not. And that simply comes down to mate selection. And there's no point in the female having the big, cumbersome, ridiculous tail feathers. She doesn't need to prove her value as a mate to the males, and the shoe is on the other foot. So the males have the responsibility of proving their health, their virility, their social status, and a lot of that comes down in birds to the quality of their plumage. The peacock is a very fine and well-known example of that. A big healthy male with high testosterone levels and good genetics has a beautiful full tail of colourful feathers. And the females of many bird species obviously are famous for having excellent vision, possibly even seeing colours that are not even in the spectrum for human eyes. So yeah, she gets a very good look at a male. A couple of superb starlings there as well, those very blue-backed, orange-breasted, shiny-looking things. There's a little bit less sexual dimorphism in those superb starlings. The females are also quite pretty. Yeah, I'm certainly not an expert or a dedicated birder by any means. I have lots of colleagues that are absolutely barking mad for the birds. And I think if you are a naturalist, a connoisseur of time out in the bush, a healthy interest in the birds will probably serve you quite well. Obviously, we don't always have big, impressive, high-profile species like giraffes, elephants, lions, leopards to look at all the time. So in the absence of the big stuff, it's important to be able to find wonder and to be able to present that wonder in other species and other elements. As we know, absolutely everything out here contains value, and I believe can be presented in an interesting way. Yeah, I think you would sell the experience of a safari out in the wild extremely short if you only looked at the big stuff. There is beauty in every living thing. You just have to know how to look. And I think most people are willing to see it. And there's that straw-tailed wider again. He's a bit in and out, he's all over the place. But yeah, that wider family, and there are a number of individuals across Africa, paradise widers, pin-tailed widers, they're all brood parasites. And what that means is they practice a breeding behavior not dissimilar from that of cuckoos, in the sense that they deposit their eggs in other birds' nests quite sneakily, and the other bird is tricked into doing all of the parenting work, raising those chicks. The straw-tailed widers are not involved at all in chick raising, nest building, or chick protection, I guess. I'm not quite sure what those bigger birds are, these sort of brown, fairly nondescript looking individuals. That's where it gets a bit tricky. The birders call them little brown jobs. Fairly nondescript sparrow type. And yeah, certainly being in East Africa, a little bit out of my area of expertise, to be honest. Nikki says, I appreciate that Wild Earth covers all wildlife and not just the big animals. The birds in Africa amaze me. Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, we certainly do try wherever possible to keep these safaris as holistic as possible. We will, of course, always give focus to something like a leopard or a lion or a beautiful big elephant if it does show up. But there is a lot of other stuff to look at. This fairly dark bird that's landed in the middle of the bush here Looks to me to be a red-billed buffalo weaver, another communal nesting bird. They build these immense colonies, possibly 50, 60 pairs of birds, each in a little apartment in kind of a greater nest construction. Joan Mello says, I love the bee eaters. Certainly, Joan, those are amongst the most vibrant and colourful of Africa's birds. Some beautiful bee eaters around. The European bee eaters, which would have spent the summer south of Old Donyo, stretching all the way down to us in southern Africa, have now begun their migration back up as far north as southern Spain. So we won't see them again until the onset of the summer rains, much later this year. Yeah, pretty crazy that something as tiny as a bird, weighing only 4 or 5 grams, perhaps a little bit more, can make an intercontinental migration. It absolutely blows my mind. Yeah, navigating such extremes as the Sahara Desert, where there is no place to stop, no food, no water, and many millions of them make it across. A testament to the resilience of nature and the resilience of birds. Ants, certainly a ton of birds here. Again, I'm not too sure about these little brown guys. Perhaps one of the weavers, but it's a bit tricky. Alrighty, well, from small to great, I think let's check back in at Tau, where I believe something very large indeed has made its way down to the water. So jumping a quick 5,000 or 6,000 kilometers to the south, we are back once again at Tau. In Madikwe, right up on South Africa's boundary with Botswana to the north, and a large group of elephants has made its way down. Crazy, we were only here 10 minutes ago, no ellies to be seen, and like magic they just emerge. A big crocodile on the move as well in the mud, sort of at the bottom of the frame there. So certainly as predicted, we're approaching 2 in the afternoon, 2 p.m. Things are hotting up, and that croc is getting hungry. Time to do a bit of fishing. Amongst a flock of red and yellow-billed ducks by the looks of things, a black-winged stilt. Some dust-bathing ellies in the distance there. There is lots to look at. Big waterbuck bull as well on that sort of marshy floating bed of grass. Not too much grass around for him to feed on, so this certainly is a bit of an oasis. Now, these waterbuck are highly dependent on the availability of water and certainly the presence of fresh grazing. They are one of those species that is hardest hit by tough times, tough conditions. So this guy has landed with his bum in the butter to some degree, and it doesn't look like he's got any other waterbuck around to compete with. A bit of a risk though for an antelope to be out all on its own. Obviously so often we see other antelope species in groups, and that is for the theory of safety in numbers. But ultimately it's a gamble, and I guess fortune favors the brave to some degree. Yeah, I'm using all these silly sayings. Got to risk it to get the biscuit and such. Cookster's Littlefield says, great to hear you, Liam, and also congrats. May your logbook runneth over. Cookster's, thank you so much. A work in progress. Paul Legerton, and Paul, apologies if I've pronounced your surname incorrectly there, says, hello, great show. Where is the extra water for the waterhole pumped in from? So, Paul, it'll be pumped directly from the water table a couple of 100 feet below by means of probably quite an efficient solar pump. Yeah, it's kind of a bit of an ethical discussion as to whether or not water should be provided at all. And in a very large national park where animals have the ability to move pretty vast distances, it can be healthier to allow nature to take its course and for animals to move into areas where rivers are still flowing, giving areas where water is not available a bit of a break from the trampling hooves and sort of the hungry mouths. But in a place like Madikwe, in spite of its size, it's fenced on all sides. Animal movement then is somewhat restricted. So the people that have established this place are left with some responsibility to provide resources for the wildlife. And so that's exactly what's happening. It's also a bit of a trade-off in the sense that safaris are businesses. People pay top dollar to come in from all over the world to come and see wildlife. It would be very difficult to market a place as a safari destination if people were jetting in to find a dust bowl full of death and suffering. So better to have animals nicely distributed across the reserve, lots of water around, ample sightings. And this Tower Game Lodge is a hive of activity through the dry season. A number of warthogs coming out of the scrub in the background there to join our pachyderms. It's interesting, all of these ellies are smaller in size. I suppose smaller is all relative. Sort of 2 to 3 tons in size. But they all appear to me to be males. So once again, this is a bachelor herd. Quite spectacularly chucking trunkfuls of dust onto that individual's back there. Dust serves a similar purpose to kind of a sprinkling of mud, which elephants will partake in quite eagerly as well. But the dust has the added benefit, I think, of chasing away flies. There are a number of species of horseflies that can inflict a pretty excruciating bite, even in us humans. So an elephant getting bitten around its eyes or on the very soft skin behind their ears. Now the best way to deal with that is to chuck some dust at them. Just see that crocodile on the water's edge as well, slinking around. He's off on their missions. What a nice scene. Yeah, we've certainly been very blessed in recent days with very regular sightings of a number of elephant groups here and in places like Tembe Elephant Park in KwaZulu-Natal. Yeah, and that is to be expected at this time of year. There isn't a whole lot of water available out in the bush. Many of the ephemeral pans have already dried up. So these are little melting pots for elephant interaction. Yeah, and the beauty of this Live at the Waterhole show is that we have the ability to hop between multiple feeds. I think there must be over 10 at various lodges and sort of points of interest. So yeah, certainly in the absence of much to talk about in one spot, we could always go somewhere else. A bit like safari teleportation. Again, the waterbirds and mixing things up in that floating vegetation there are red-billed ducks. They are quite nice looking birds. They're a very common duck species, but they're under threat to some degree from hybridization with feral mallard ducks, which are a northern hemisphere bird. I think many of those have escaped from farms and private bird collections and established themselves in South African waterways with ample food, ample nesting space. And yeah, they are hybridizing with these yellow and red-billed ducks and causing issues. Coot also swimming around back there. We don't see a whole lot of those in the Lowveld where I'm from, but they do seem to like it up here at Old Madikwe. Alrighty, well, in the vein of checking out some interesting bird life, I think let's make that leap once again up to Old Donyo in southern Kenya. So back up at Old Donyo, a number of superb starlings doing a bit of bathing. Once again maintaining those vibrant feathers. Yeah, starlings possess feathers. A number of other birds do as well, but the starlings out here are famous for them. Feathers that contain what we call an iridescence. So quite amazingly, if you were to pluck one of those shiny metallic bluish or purplish feathers off of their backs and check it out under extreme magnification through a microscope, the feathers are brown. But look at them in the sunlight and they shimmer like oil on the water's surface, and it is just a trick. It's an illusion caused by the refraction of light on specifically angled fibers in those feathers. Pretty marvelous stuff. And off they go. Also keeping an eye out for a number of other species that occur around here. That's a nice emerald spotted wood dove by the looks of things. A very, very small wild pigeon species. But yeah, there are a whole host of other interesting smaller life forms that we do see from time to time here at Old Donyo. Things like the East African rock agama, beautiful, vivid, multicolored lizard. We have been seeing little ground squirrels. Yeah, there's all sorts going on. We haven't been seeing so much of the kind of heavier herbivores around the water here at Old Donyo lately, and that can simply be explained by the onset of pretty extreme rains. And if we do pan around, you'll see that the bush is emerald green, the grass is long, the trees are all looking very lush. So East Africa is in the grips of a wonderful wet cycle, which has broken a number of years of very disappointing rainfall. But what that means for game viewing, and certainly from these waterhole cams, is that there are thousands of smaller waterholes now, smaller ephemeral pans out in the bush. So many of the animals are having their water needs met elsewhere. Still though, we may be lucky enough to catch a glimpse of a big tusker elephant, a nice Maasai giraffe, some of the fringe-eared oryx, and the other cool things that are out here. Yeah, check out that emerald foliage. It's amazing how a couple of weeks of good rain and nice exposure to the sun just transforms what was a very dry, dusty place, semi-arid, into a summer wonderland to some degree. There's very, very typical umbrella-shaped acacia thorn trees, umbrella thorns. Sort of the tree you expect to see a giraffe feeding off of. That's the African postcard shot. Now it's believed in some parts of Africa that if you, as a tribesman wandering around out on the savannah, find yourself caught in an electrical storm, that these umbrella thorn trees provide some sort of a specialized defense against lightning strikes if you were to climb up into the canopy of the tree and take shelter. Now we know scientifically that probably the worst place to be in a lightning storm would be in a tree. So certainly not advising you to do that. It's better to be low to the ground or in something like a car, or preferably indoors. It's interesting though, many of our African trees have pretty sensitive relationships with the animals that actually feed on them, and the elephant is a prime example of that. I think of the example of the Acacia nigrescens, which is a close cousin. It's in the same family of this Acacia tortilis that we're looking at now, the umbrella thorn. So these Acacia nigrescens trees, or knob thorns as they're commonly known, occur across much of sub-Saharan Africa, and they rely quite heavily on the local elephant population for the dispersal of their seeds. To give you an idea, a study was done on those knobthorn trees in South Africa's Lowveld, and it was discovered that when those trees naturally produce fruit towards the end of the summer, or seeds rather than fruit, they grow high up in the canopy, a little bit like a snap pea. So inside a pod with two halves, there's 3 or 4 very flat seeds in that pod. When the pod is fully developed, it dries out, splits open, and those seeds drop down onto the soil below. Now, under the shade of the adult knobthorn tree's canopy, one of those little seeds, even if it gets everything that it needs, exposure to sufficient sunlight, and certainly a bit of rainfall, I think that's an impala walking across, that little seedling, or that little seed, statistically only has about a 13% chance of germinating. So pretty dismal. However, if those seeds are consumed by an African elephant, and I assure you many millions of them are each year, carried off in an elephant's digestive system, and they pass through the Ellie's stomach without being damaged, and are very often deposited in a wonderful pile of nutrient-rich fertilizer that goes up to 86%. So the trees need the elephants as much as the elephants need the trees. Yeah, certainly looks like the ears of a herd of impala moving past. Ears and horns. So there is still mammal life around. In recent weeks we've viewed these impala in this particular area rutting, and these females are the exact reason for that behavior. So the males quite literally go head to head to fight for the mating rights to arguably 100 females in a particularly big group. If successful, the male has the somewhat unenviable task of trying to get all of those ladies pregnant, because they all ovulate in a synchronized fashion all at the same time. So he's got his work cut out for him, trying to get them all pregnant in about a 2 period. But the truth of the matter is, he's very often unsuccessful. He runs himself so ragged, trying to keep them all together, trying to chase away other males, that very often he gets about 20 or 30% of the work done, and he just collapses onto the ground from exhaustion. Alrighty, now for something completely different, a location we haven't checked out for a day or two. Let's head over to South Africa once again, to our flamingo colony at Comfort's Dam. Beautiful, so a slightly windier and overcast looking day here in Kimberley, way up in South Africa's north. Or rather northwest, and fairly minimal flamingo numbers, at least in this frame, but there are still a couple around, and in truth we do see flamingos at this location fairly reliably throughout the year. This is, after all, one of the few places that these flamingos can actually come and feed and breed in peace. It's an artificial wetland created by a very well-renowned South African ornithologist, a South African bird scientist, in connection with one of the local mines. Kimberley, after all, famous as sort of a diamond mining area. So yeah, nice to see another side of the mining world, a bit of sustainability and responsibility towards the environment. And they're certainly showing us that here at Compass. And of course, it's not only home to flamingos, a number of duck species, the coots. We've seen little grebes here. Also call this place home. Yeah, the thing that draws the flamingos to this particular area is the sodic content of the soil. So sodic sounds a bit like sodium. The soil has very, very high salt contents. The salt helps with the growth of the things that they feed on in the water, things like algae and diatoms. And that can't really be found in the right quantities and in too many places in Africa. So these flamingos travel huge distances. These particular individuals that we're looking at may well have arrived from as far afield as Lake Natron in East Africa, where they also breed. But unfortunately, they're under a bit of pressure at Lake Natron at the moment, where I believe quite significant soda ash mining is going on. So, there's a bit of pressure on their habitat. Thankfully, that's not happening here. And this Compass Dam area has been a very successful place for them to breed. Joan Mello, they absolutely do. So, flamingos need that salty water. Water that is a bit briny. It was long thought that flamingos got their pink coloration from little crustaceans like shrimp that occur in brine-type water, salty water. But we now know, in fact, that they get their pinkish color from carotenoids, which are sort of reddish, pinkish pigments in the algae that they're feeding on. Interestingly, carotenoids also occur in carrots, as their name suggests, giving carrots an orange color and leading to the red color in the flesh of a tomato as well. Somehow I'm glad, though, that we humans are not turned red every time we eat a tomato and onion salad. And I believe it's out of sight, but somewhere in this wetland system there is a system of artificially constructed breeding islands for these flamingos. So basically just piles of earth in the middle of the water, kind of flattened above the water's edge, on which these flamingos once or twice a year are able to attempt to raise a brood of chicks. And it has been immensely successful in recent years, with them raising literally thousands of chicks as a colony in a season. I think something like 4,000 chicks were produced here in 2007, something like that. So especially with the knowledge that their habitat is under threat in other places, this Compass Dam is really a flamingo sanctuary. Quite a special place. Now, I apologize for us not zooming in on this scene so much today. You can see the wind kind of gusting on the water surface there. From memory, the camera here is very, very sensitive to the wind. So if we do too much zooming, it tends to get very shaky and a bit unwatchable. But alrighty, maybe time to let sleeping flamingos lie. You can see them all on one leg there. Let's head up to a new location for the afternoon. Let's pop in at Rosie's in Olifantswest. Haha. Now we're back up in my neck of the woods. This is Olifantswest Game Reserve outside the town of Hoedspruit in South Africa's Limpopo province. A very dry looking reserve at the moment, but as its name suggests, it is the home of elephants. Yeah, you can see all of those red bush willow trees in the background are changing colour, shedding their leaves. Our answer to the fall leaves in parts of the northern hemisphere. Yeah, quite beautiful, and certainly from the perspective of someone who likes to take wildlife photographs. Spending large amounts of time in various different seasons in a reserve can be quite rewarding. The colours are always changing. Might not be the easiest time for the animals though, but thankfully once again water is artificially provided in a number of spots, Rosie's being one of them. I'm sure this very thirsty young elephant bull is grateful for that. This Olifantswest Game Reserve will always hold a very special part or place in my heart. I actually basically began my guiding journey, or my journey as a naturalist in this area, leading safaris for a little lodge called Sausage Tree Safari Camp, a luxury tented lodge in the area for about 3 years, I think. Yeah, it was a wonderful place to find my feet as a naturalist, and it propelled me into a very enjoyable career. It really is a wild place with probably 7 or 8 kilometers of Olifants River frontage to the north and a connection to the greater Kruger ecosystem. No fences separating the two. Yeah, I've always favoured these open type systems as far as it concerns choosing a place to seek employment. Yeah, the beauty of an open system is you just never know what you're going to see. There's new animals arriving from the deeper Kruger all the time. And of course this was the place over 10 years ago now, in 2013, where I crossed paths with that magnificent greater Kruger tusker elephant, Ezelwini. Yeah, and I was privileged recently, just a couple of months ago, to cross paths with him once again at Pridelands with Wild Earth TV. And what a pleasure to see the handsome gentleman that he has in fact developed into. He was impressive in 2013. In 2024, he's outrageous. A huge bull. Yeah, if you didn't see the live segments we did at Pridelands with Wild Earth, you can check it out on my my Instagram. So have a look at Liam Burrow Wildlife. I think the most recent video I posted is of that bull I'm talking about. He's a huge guy. But yeah, as is often the case with the very biggest of elephants, with the longest of tusks, they are absolute puppy dogs. Very kind, approachable, gentle giants. I think essentially an amount of confidence comes with being so large. If you put yourself in his mindset, there is literally nothing out here that is going to challenge him. Certainly no other elephant. And the elephants, after all, are the biggest animals in the landscape. So a big bull like that knows that he's the king, and very little tends to fuss him or faze him. This guy, though, is by no means a fully mature elephant bull. I would estimate his age to be somewhere in the mid-20s. So he's only just coming into his own. He probably won't be doing too much breeding, too much mating until he's in his mid-30s. Female ellies tend to be quite particular when it comes to choosing the bull they want to mate with. And I guess that makes enough sense. If you think about it from the perspective of a female elephant, the commitment to fall pregnant is a 22-month-long engagement, the longest gestation period of any mammal on land. And when that baby arrives, that's possibly the beginning of a lifelong relationship. So she wants the very best genes for her calf. They want to build strong babies. Thankfully, this camera is mounted a bit out of this elephant's reach. It's high up on a hide here at Rosie's. Yeah, ellies, like humans, are obviously very intelligent and often quite curious. So if you do leave something like a camera out in the bush within reach, there's a very real risk that an elephant will crush it if a hyena doesn't eat it. So these cams have to be intelligently mounted and certainly well protected. Yeah, and you might think it's perhaps a little bit unusual to see a single elephant all on his own. Now for the bulls, it's more common to see them sort of scattered around the landscape. They don't necessarily need to be in close proximity to other ellies all the time. And it's a bit of a different story for the cows and the calves. As a general rule, they are always together. But of course, you've got to remember that elephants have the ability to communicate over vast distances through low-frequency communications that they make with an enormous larynx, the biggest larynx out here, that's for sure. So he could quite realistically be chatting to the other members of his bachelor group, a group he undoubtedly belongs to, over 5, 10, even 25 kilometers has been reported. So he might look like he's on his own, but he's still connected to his social network. And should he feel the need to meet up with them again, he lets out this booming vocalization. Vocalization we only just kind of get the fringes of with our fairly limited range of human hearing. Here's where his friends are. Turns tail and he can move in that direction. A big fish swirl in the waterhole there as well. I'm sure a nice big catfish here in Rosie's. Yeah, we've had some pretty incredible sightings here around the waterhole at Rosie's. Fairly regularly, a lone male hippo takes up residence here, though I have my doubts that he's here on this particular occasion. We've also had a sighting of lions at least once. We had that incredible sighting of a small pack of wild dogs killing a female impala about where this elephant is standing now, a number of months back. And of course, very regular ellies, occasional giraffes. There's always the promise of a leopard. When I guided in this area, there was a male leopard called the three-spot male, TSM for short, that took up residence here. Yeah, we saw him very regularly. I witnessed him on one remarkable occasion amongst a herd of about 300 buffalo here at Rosie's. He was up in the canopy of a short red bush willow tree, pounced down onto the back of one of the smallest buffalo calves, and leapt right back up into the canopy with this buffalo still alive. Yeah, outrageous. We viewed him for a while. He was only a young male leopard, and over about the next 4 days he killed an impala and killed a civet, all in the same place. So 3 kills in 3 different trees, all within sort of visual range. We could see them all at the same time. But alrighty, with our big elephant bull here making a bit of an exit into the red bush willows, let's head over now to South Africa's east coast and check in at Tembe Elephant Park. And as Tembe's name suggests, we are crawling with elephants here in KwaZulu-Natal. Isn't that it? So a big breeding herd by the looks of things, possibly a bull or 2 mixed in. A number of warthogs, looks like impala in the background. And plenty of green vegetation all over the show. Yeah, much like Old Donyo, the rainfall in this part of the world this year has been extreme. Very, very healthy rainfall. So Tembe is a bit of an oasis. But this boom of rainfall and wonderful summer sunshine conditions has brought with it a bit of a boom of that floating green vegetation, which is not such nice stuff. It's an alien invasive species from the Amazon, a water cabbage, accidentally brought in by humans. And it's now choking up southern African waterways. Really terrible. Yeah, we've chatted about it in previous episodes. It all looks, and certainly it's not toxic, so the animals can feed on it. But it's highly fibrous, not very nutritious stuff. So pretty much everything seems to stay away from it. And unfortunately, with it being left alone and given perfect conditions for its development, it forms a solid carpet over the water's surface. And we've seen it develop here at Tembe, even in recent weeks, closing all the gaps here. A time will come where it covers the entire water's surface, blocking all the light from entering, and that kills all of the indigenous aquatic plants living below and affects countless thousands of different little species beneath. Fish and insects and all sorts of other things that need sun to be penetrating that water. So it isn't good. Something definitely has to be done to take it away. I understand that herbicides do work on it, so you can sort of spray toxic things onto it to kill it. But obviously, spraying toxic chemicals in a wilderness area is not an optimal solution. So in most cases, it actually has to be taken out by hand. What a mission. And of course, in an area where crocodiles may well be existing, you certainly wouldn't want to be up to your chest loading this stuff into a sack. But yeah, maybe the ecology team here at Tembe can figure something out. As I say, a number of elephants around. From a bit of a distance, I think I saw a radio collar on the neck of that cow walking to the right along the water's edge. It may be a different one. We were talking about that water weed for a little bit. So yeah, a number of elephants in this population are monitored by elephant experts and elephant conservationists to try and keep an eye on their movements, figure out where they're going as the seasons change, and certainly to keep an eye on any individuals that may choose to leave the confines of these protected areas. Now, there is, after all, still a little bit of elephant movement between Tembe Elephant Park here in KwaZulu-Natal and reserves further north across the border into Mozambique. Unfortunately, the space along the way, which was historically a very active and natural elephant migration route that would have at one time stretched all the way up to places like Oldonyo in Kenya, is now peppered with human activity along the way. There are tar roads and train tracks which can be very treacherous for elephants to cross. Many elephants in the wild are killed by trains and being hit by cars. And of course, the elephants that are lucky enough to escape the cars and the trains and cross all of the fences and human-made barriers often find themselves in agricultural areas. Now, we've seen how much an elephant can eat out in the wild. You can imagine an elephant stepping into something like a cornfield would be totally disastrous. From the perspective of a subsistence farmer out in the sort of rural areas in Africa, an elephant is probably your worst nightmare. You can imagine you've got kind of a single acre of corn or sorghum or millet or something like that, a grain planted with the idea that you're going to be able to sustain your family on it for the rest of the year. And an elephant or two crosses through that field, and in a single evening, that entire crop is flattened. So we have to try and see it from the farmer's perspective as well. Obviously, it's easy to empathize with the Ellies. I certainly love elephants, but there are a lot of people out there living very, very close to the poverty line. So some sort of balance has to be found between the two in order for humans and elephants to live out their lives and have their needs met. So certainly those telemetry collars, like you can see on that cow moving off to the left there, followed by her little one, are a pretty essential tool at getting a good idea where these elephants are actually going. And perhaps even warning those farmers when the Ellies are on their way. Thanks very much for the compliment there, Joan Mello. Happy you're enjoying the show. And Eagle Lover has asked quite a good question. Thanks, Eagle Lover. Eagle Lover has asked, do male impala mate with female offspring if he as the dominant male is still in charge of the harem? Now, Eagle Lover, certainly, practically, I guess it would be possible for that male to mate with his female lambs when they do mature. But thankfully, the life of a male impala is generally fairly short-lived. Certainly a big dominant guy. They reach maturity at 4 years of age, at which time they'll have the opportunity to rut, to compete with other males. And the males that are successful, as mentioned earlier, will very, very rapidly run around trying to mate with as many females as possible. And for the majority of those rams, it is a fatal experience. The males wear themselves out. So, it's very probable that many impala lambs will never meet their dad. He has long since died and been eaten or swallowed up by the environment. And as harsh as that may seem, it's probably for the best, preventing things like inbreeding, keeping those gene pools nice and clear. Isn't nature outrageous? Now, there is a very large elephant bull in the back there, the guy flapping his ears. You can see him standing at least 2 or 3 feet taller than the biggest cows in this group. He's also sniffing around this cow closest to him, so there's a possibility she may be an estrus female, a female who is ovulating at the moment. Without a doubt, that'll be one of the biggest bulls in the area. He is a colossus. So certainly a bull that these cows would be interested in pairing off with. Sandy Franklin 69 has asked, why do snares get onto reserves? For anybody who doesn't know, Sandy Franklin is asking with regards to wire snare traps, which are set in some reserves by subsistence poachers. So people that try to come into these reserves illegally and trap smaller game, things like antelope, warthogs, impala, kudu, that sort of thing, maybe a duiker if they can have one. But the problem with setting a snare trap, which is a simple loop of wire supported by a couple of twigs, anchored to the base of a very heavy tree usually, and often quite strategically placed in a very busy game path. Now, the big issue with that is that the snare doesn't differentiate between animals. The snare doesn't only choose impala. So very often an elephant will place its front leg accidentally into that snare, pulling it tight. The elephant then panics, pulling against that tree. The wire cuts down to the bone, and very regularly the wire will snap. The elephant walks off with a horrible infection and a limp, which may be fatal. And occasionally the animal doesn't get away; it just dies at the tree. So it is really one of the most horrible, one of the darkest sides of poaching, and we've seen it with leopards in the Sabi Sands at and around Djuma in recent years, coming from the Manyaleti. So it's a bit tricky, I think, in areas where snaring is a problem. I guess the overall security of the area needs to be reassessed, and steps need to be taken to be ensured that people aren't gaining access. People ideally shouldn't be walking around in these reserves, and if they are, there is a problem. I say that it's a lot easier said than done. A lot of these areas are completely vast. You look at the Kruger, over 1.9 million hectares in size, smaller than, or rather larger than, a lot of the smaller countries in Europe. So again, a lot easier said than done to just say, do more policing. It's a big issue. You cannot keep eyes on the entire thing all the time. People cut fences, people climb over fences, so it's a constant thing. It's tricky. And taking out our frustrations as viewers on these areas for perhaps not keeping up with the conservation, I think, is quite counterproductive. There are a lot of good people out there doing everything they can, risking it for very minimum wages, to do the often thankless work of protecting wildlife and protecting wilderness. I think a better solution is to empower people out in the communities, give them jobs in these wilderness areas. If people see the value of wildlife over and above a source of meat, then you'll have more value for that wildlife in the community. Yeah, it's tricky. It's very, very tricky. But yeah, an excellent question and an interesting discussion. So thanks for that, Sandy Franklin. So Mercedes has asked, Liam, do you know why impala males are rams while kudu are bulls? Absolutely, Mercedes. So it all comes down to size. And amongst African antelope, the transition between rams, which are generally smaller antelope, rams and ewes for males and females, and cows and bulls for large antelope species for males and females, happens with the nyala. So a nyala ewe, or a nyala female is a ewe, a nyala male is a bull. And that comes down to the pretty large size discrepancy between the two sexes of that particular species. Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting one. Cookster's Littlefield says, the first waterhole many years ago that jump-started a South African watch fest. Then I found Wild Earth from here. Thank you, Tembi. Thanks very much for that comment there, Cooksters. I wasn't aware that there was a camera here at Tembi ages ago. I actually started checking out these live feeds as a kid. I must have been about 10. So that was a good 20 odd years ago, 20 plus now, at I think it was Pete's Pan in Botswana, and that was an African feed. And yeah, watching it quite eagerly on a very disappointing dial-up internet connection all that time ago, I guess got me hooked as well. Very, very cool for me personally to be here all these years later now chatting and answering questions on these feeds. It's kind of come full circle for me as well. But nice to have you on board there, Cookster's Littlefield. We chatted a little bit on the Live at the Waterhole show yesterday about elephant ears and how those can be an indicator of an elephant's age to some degree. A little bit like humans, I believe, ears and noses continue to grow. Quite frightening if you, like myself, already have large ears and quite a bulky nose. It's only going to get worse for you and me. But check out this big elephant cow right in the middle with the radio collar on, and the size of her ears. Those are immense, even by elephant standards. So it's quite possible to estimate that this elephant cow is kind of in the final chapter of her life. She could well be mid-40s to potentially even early 50s in terms of ears. Those are some big, big, big ears. Yeah, and elephant cows are baby-making machines. She will remain in an almost permanent state of pregnancy well into her 50s. Only really stopping breeding right towards the end. Which is a very good thing considering elephant populations and population trends in Africa. While ivory poaching might not be too much of an issue for the Ellies here in Tembi, touch wood, in other parts of Africa, the situation is fairly dire. In some areas where it is at its worst, an elephant is reckoned to be shot every 15 minutes on average through the day. All in pursuit of those silly white teeth, which are carved into trinkets and chopsticks, bangles, that sort of thing. Yeah, without a doubt, it does carve beautifully. It carves like no other substance on earth, arguably even better than the fine marble used by the likes of the Michelangelos of ancient history. But I think if you are looking at a carved, beautiful, polished piece of ivory, if you imagine where that came from and the circumstances through which it was taken from that elephant, it's a much less pretty thing to own. Now, contrary to what the people selling the ivory in the shops in places like China and Vietnam will tell you, the ivory was not picked up off the ground. It was hacked out of the face of an elephant with an axe. In some cases while that elephant was still alive. So you can certainly do your bit to fight against ivory poaching by simply never, ever, ever purchasing a piece of ivory if you do travel anywhere in the world. The only thing that needs an elephant tusk is, after all, an elephant. And if the buying stops, the killing can too. But yeah, as I mentioned earlier, thankfully these ellie cows, oh, and there's a giraffe, are baby-making machines. So given the right protection, and certainly given enough habitat, the ellies in Africa have the potential to make a resounding recovery. And we've got about 350,000 left in Africa, so there's a very real chance, if we can change our human ways, that the ellies will be here long after we're gone, which is the way it should be. Canine Girl asks a very good question. Will the elephant's senses allow them to realize contaminated water sources? Canine Girl, under most circumstances, absolutely yes. So ellies are very particular when it comes to the water that they choose to drink. If it's in any way too stagnant, maybe an animal has got in there and died or something like that. If the water is going to make them sick, they generally avoid it like the plague. They are, however, a little bit less good at sensing water that's been poisoned. We've seen it in some parts of Zimbabwe, where ivory poachers attempt to kill a mass of elephants all at the same time by lacing the water with something like cyanide. Cyanide, to my knowledge, even for people, is tasteless and scentless. It doesn't have a smell. So yeah, in that particular case I'm thinking of, I think something like 250 ellies died. Of course, that's only counting elephants. We know how many other species come down to the water and drink. So every leopard, every bird, every antelope within that range also suffered greatly and possibly passed away. Brutal. I can't imagine somebody wanting to do something like that. Lorraine says, thank you very much for a great program I watch every day. That's wonderful to hear, Lorraine, and please continue to do so. We will do our very best to keep presenting this wonderful unscripted, live, interactive wildlife content. So quite a big southern giraffe bull crossing at the back there. Yeah, two of Africa's greats in one frame. The heaviest and, of course, the tallest. So Diane has asked, when an elephant dies naturally, as many of them do rangers collect the tusks? Diane, they do. And that's very common practice in all of South Africa's sort of government-managed reserves, as well as the private sector. So what you do if you do pick up an elephant tusk out on drive, or if an elephant dies, the national parks officials are called in, the tusks are taken out, they're given a special serial number which is stamped onto them, and then that is placed in some form of a register. and then the tusks go into a bit of a... But I have a bit of an issue with that because, of course, African governments notorious for deep corruption, obviously sitting on stockpiles of hundreds of tons of ivory, and South Africa is reckoned to have plenty. There would be lots of motivation, I would say, for pieces to go missing from those storerooms. If you travel up once again to Old Donyo, I think the Kenyan Wildlife Authority has got the right idea, and they obviously have lots of reserves, plenty of places where elephants die of natural causes. They do the same thing, and they stockpile these tusks. But every so often, when the stockpile in Kenya gets big enough, they call all of the media, invite everybody out to an open field, pile all of this hundreds of tons of ivory, literally billions of dollars worth, cover it in petrol, and they set it all on fire, which I think is fabulous. Absolutely nobody needs to own it. And I think it still has the potential to do quite a lot of damage and to enter into that black market trade if it simply exists. So destroy it. No point in hanging on to it. My thoughts anyway, my 2 cents. Now, as this giraffe emerges, I'm actually seeing it's not a bull. I think this is a female. Yeah, a couple of little things you can look out for. It's not always the clearest, especially at a bit of a distance. But I urge you to look to the ossicles on the top of her head. The fact that those are nice and fluffy, and the absence of what looks like a belly button on her lower belly tells us this is a cow. In a big bull, that belly button, or the navel from a distance, is not actually a navel, it's his penis sheath, which is obviously a good indication that it's a male, and his ossicles, or those bony formations on the top of his head, sometimes incorrectly referred to as horns, those are thick and bald in the bulls. So yeah, this is a cow. Spas, hello, good afternoon. Spas asks, are there records of leopards at Tembe, Liam? Absolutely, Spas. So a very good place for leopards to live with ample prey. I don't know if the sightings are as easy to come by as they are in a place like the Sabi Sands, which is renowned as probably the best place in the world to come and view wild leopards. And we see that with many of the very regular characters and all of this hype at Wild Earth with those leopards around Djuma. But certainly there are leopards here. In actual fact, leopards are fairly well established all over Africa, from deserts and winelands to mountains, to jungles, to savanna. They are arguably the most adaptable big cat in the entire world. Yeah, they are occasionally even spotted on the outskirts of South Africa's biggest cities. I've heard of a leopard getting run over by a car in Pretoria in South Africa a number of years back. So they are all over the show. Where other predators die out with their prey items, leopards just change their behavior. They'll eat something else. And if the only thing available is domestic cats and dogs, they'll happily just eat those. Yeah, Joan Mellows says, that's sad, Liam, and an awful way to die. Certainly, I think chatting about the elephant issues again, ivory poaching and whatnot. Certainly, Joan, it is super devastating. Always sad to lose an elephant when humans are involved. And I think for me, the saddest thing about it is not necessarily the loss of a single elephant, but it's the damage that's left behind in the elephant families. Obviously, we know they are so emotional, so connected to one another. They rely on one another. It doesn't take too much of a stretch of the imagination to say there's love there. So they grieve when their family members are killed. Yeah, it should be treated as one of the worst crimes possible, I reckon, to poach an elephant. And certainly some nations in Africa treat it a lot more seriously than others. Hello, Lady Macbeth. Nice to have you on board as well, another regular. Lady Macbeth says, not everyone agrees with the destruction of ivory and rhino horn. It's not a black and white issue. You've absolutely hit it on the head there, Lady Macbeth. Certainly not black and white. But yeah, I think it is perhaps a little bit foolish to not think of the lessons we've already learned in the past, especially when we think of the upliftment of the ivory ban and moratorium on the trade in legal ivory that occurred in Africa in the 80s, with the concept that is, I think, being proliferated again, with people saying that we should flood the market with this available ivory from stockpiles and available rhino horn from stockpiles. Flood the market, it'll make the price crash on the black market, and that'll fix all the problems. Interesting though, if you cross back to the 70s and 80s, the African elephant population was in a pretty poor state of affairs once again. It was once again suggested, flood the market, sell all of the ivory from the stock rooms, which was done. Zimbabwe did it, Botswana did it, I believe Kenya did it, and it opened the floodgates. A little bit like blood diamonds, it is biologically impossible to tell the difference between poached ivory or black market ivory and legal ivory. So a little bit like money laundering, I guess. It all just gets mixed in together. You can't tell what is legal, what is illegal. And with the price dropping by about 50-60%, the demand skyrocketed. And today we sit with an accelerated elephant and rhino poaching problem in Africa. So yeah, absolutely not a black and white issue by any means, but I don't think condoning the illegal wildlife trade is a solution at all. Yeah, but once again, much like the poaching for meat and snaring and that sort of thing, it's complex. It's complex and it gets very emotional. So it's tough. Yeah, this big bull is certainly testing these cows, investigating every adult female for the chance to mate. But I think these cows giving him a wide berth. That answer was quite clearly a no. Yeah, it's a bit of a race for an elephant bull because an elephant cow only comes into estrus every number of years. Obviously, she falls pregnant then and she's once again unavailable. So bulls will smell these estrus cows and perhaps even pick up on their distant long-range calls. And bulls flood in from miles around for the potential to mate. But as we know, tempers can flare, and bulls will literally kill each other for those rights. Hello, Petula. Petula says, my son Sai of 3 years asks if an elephant can run faster than a rhino. Petula, they're probably about the same, to be perfectly honest with you. Somewhere in the vicinity of about 40 kilometers an hour. And yeah, if you do the maths, that is a lot faster than a human being, even compared with sort of one of the fastest humans on the planet, somebody like Usain Bolt running the 100 meters. He does that in about, I I think it's 9 seconds, 9.7 seconds, I think is his record. An elephant would cover about double that distance in the same time. So yeah, they're very, very fast. And the same is true for a rhino. We've got absolutely no hope of outrunning them on foot. So if we do find ourselves on a walking safari, one of the golden rules out in the bush is to stand still if faced with a charging animal. You can be sure you're not going to outrun it. Very cheeky young elephant in the back there, giving a bit of a mock charge to that impala. Yeah, there is endless magic in a herd of elephants, and you could quite easily spend hours at a time viewing them. For that reason, I think they are my favorite. I've been fortunate enough to spend quite literally thousands of hours with wild elephants out in their home ranges in Africa in the last, I guess, little over a decade now. But still, every time I spend extended periods with elephants, I'm seeing new stuff. Yeah, and that comes down to the versatility of this species. They are, after all, similar to people in so many ways, with their emotion, their intelligence. So the behavior is bound to be varied. Mindy Tilpau, I'm so sorry, Mindy, I'm pretty sure I've got your surname wrong there. But Mindy says, I think it really comes down to changing hearts and minds regarding both the ivory and rhino horn trade. Need to give folks another viable option for making money to feed their families. Mindy, I think you've hit it exactly right. Community involvement, I believe, holds the key. If local people can be given the opportunity to make a living from the booming tourism economy in Africa, an economy, I might add, which is only set to grow in the next 10 years, I think those people would be much less likely to come into the areas and try and make a quick buck shooting an elephant and selling tusks. So yeah, empower those people. The big lodges that are making money in the reserves need to be investing money out in the communities, paying for schools, paying for clinics, uplifting the standards of living on all sides. And many of them are, thankfully. Alrighty, well, this has certainly been a very exciting discussion regarding elephants and nature and long-term plans in Africa. But let's head over once again up to Tau Lodge in Madikwe. So once again, elephants in abundance. A couple of colossal bulls here in this fairly dry-looking patch off to the one side of the waterhole here at Tau. That bull off on the right, a particularly large behemoth of a bull. I would estimate him even at this distance to be in excess of 6 tons. Quite logically closer to 7, if not 8,000 kilos. 17,000 pounds, something like that. It's also got quite a set of tusks. Unique in this area. The population up into Madikwe and further north into Botswana are some of the biggest elephants in Africa, for sure. But their tusks, for whatever reason, perhaps genetics, seem to be kind of short and stubby. But once again, that's probably quite a good thing, because we don't seem to have too much poaching in these areas. Touch wood. Check this out. Big guy putting the slightly smaller guy on the left firmly back in his place. Take on the bull, you're going to get the horns, as the saying goes, I think. I've mentioned in earlier segments the very largest of bulls in these groups act as mentors. They very often break up fights. They are almost the governance system for these younger, quite rowdy individuals. And the youngsters need it. They're a bit like a lot of human teenagers. Hormones, poor decisions, speaking quite broadly, of course. And in the absence of the very biggest of bulls, those governors, those mentors, these young bulls run wild, start smashing into safari vehicles. And as was documented in South Africa's Pilanesberg Game Reserve a number of years ago, where a population of young male elephants was artificially reintroduced, and those ellies even started to take out those testosterone-fueled frustrations on the rhinos with devastating consequences. I think the Pilanesberg lost something like 40 white rhinos to elephants in just the space of a couple of months. But then, an incredible conservationist by the name of Gus Liebenberg, I think. I may have his surname wrong, but definitely Gus, looked to elephant biology for the answer. And he approached the Sandparks team in the Kruger National Park, asked them if they could come out there and capture a couple of very large bulls, for the thought that they could take those from the Kruger, reintroduce them into the Pilanesberg, and hopefully the bulls would calm the younger guys down. And with enormous success, the rhino killing stopped literally immediately. The big bulls immediately slotted into that role of mentors in the bachelor groups. And that's the way elephant works. It's a system. Incredible to think that nature holds the answer very, very often. And you've got to wonder how many human issues could be solved by looking to nature. Certainly, it's a source of untold magic when it comes to medicine and food and all sorts of things. But anyway, unfortunately, we have come to the final minute of the Live at the Waterhole show for today. So from our greater Wild Earth as well as Africam teams, all of the unseen people behind the scenes, our directors Chulu and Luyanda, and myself, naturalist for today, Liam Burrow, it's been a massive pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to check out a bit of African wildlife, ask your questions, and basically just learn a little bit more about the bush. Anyway, from all of us, enjoy your Sunday and chat to you soon.
A very good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us once again on this lovely